So the COVID-19 pandemic was honestly the best thing to ever happen to me. And here's why. Before I get into it, I just want to say I do understand that during this time period, it was very hard for a lot of people. Obviously, people were sick, some people lost loved ones. People were struggling financially. Maybe they lost their job during this time period. The pandemic affected a lot of people's mental health. And I get that. But if I were to, look at it from another angle, I realized that a lot of good came out of it for me. So here's why. So to give some context, I graduated college in 2019 in May. And then the next month, so June 2019, I started my first full-time job. The thing is, I had a very hard time transitioning from being away in college, having a lot of free time, being a student. So going from that and then transitioning over to now I'm moving back home with my parents and working a full-time job, it was not easy for me. I remember when I first started working, I just started questioning myself, oh man, is this what my life is going to be like? Is this what adulting is supposed to be? This seems kind of terrible, honestly. We work for 8 hours a day, we come home tired, and, we just have to look forward to the weekends. It just felt like a hard pill to swallow for me. And another thing that I kind of struggled with after I graduated, started working, back then I would compare myself to other people. So when I first started working, I compared myself to my coworkers, the people that I worked with, and a lot of them, they always had a fun weekend plan, or they're going on trips, and it seemed like they had a big social circle. Some of them were maybe settled down with a partner. I compared myself to the coworkers that I was working with. I would also compare myself to my family even, because my parents, they met in college, and then my sister, she met her partner in high school, but they dated throughout college, and they moved in together after college. So for me, when I saw that, I was maybe I'll also find my partner in college, but that did not happen. So, I was comparing myself, things like that. I also, when I first started college, I came in very hopeful, college is going to be great because I'm going to learn more about myself, and, I'll have a better idea with what I want to do with my life. But when I graduated, I was just as confused as I was when I first started. So, I felt kind of directionless, and I was constantly comparing myself to my family, about the relationships, and comparing myself to the coworkers. It seemed like they had so many exciting things going on, and I felt like I just wasn't really doing much. And you make small talk with your coworkers, and people would ask me, Brandon, what do you like to do in your free time? What do you like to do on the weekends? Any weekend plans? And it was so hard for me to answer those questions because I didn't really have much going on. I didn't have a lot of hobbies compared to compared to like what I like to do now. I feel like nowadays, like there's always something that I'm doing that's interesting. Like I never feel bored. But back then it was quite the opposite. And I remember even one day, this is like a couple months into my job, but like my sister came home to visit. She lives in another state, and she was asking me what I was up to, and she basically told me like, "Oh, Brandon, it seems like you don't really do much." And I remember just feeling so shocked, but I guess it hurt because it was the truth. Like she was telling me the truth, and I guess I didn't really want to admit it. So, I was comparing myself to other people. It was hard for me to accept the reality that, working a full-time job is going to be the rest of my life. I felt directionless because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And so after a couple months into the job, the first couple months was training, so it wasn't like real work. But after a couple months, I got placed onto like an actual project. So once that started, I would commute into DC. That's where my client site was. And I would wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would, quickly run out of bed, shower, and just drive to the metro. And then I would take the metro into DC. And that would take me like a little over an hour, like an hour, 15 minutes. So going there took an hour, and then coming back home took another hour as well. And it just really tired me out. It drained me so quickly. So like by the time I came home, I would try to go to the gym, when I came home from work. But since I was so tired, there would be some days where I come home from work and then I would take a nap for like 3-4 hours. I would wake up at like 8 o'clock at night. I would eat dinner, and then I would just go back to bed because I didn't want to do anything else. I was just so tired. And, this is going on for months. And, at this point, like, I'm still like going to work, but I'm also just applying to jobs because I'm so fed up. Like I told myself like, yeah, like I can't, I can't keep doing this job. I want to leave this company, go somewhere else. So I'm applying to jobs, and I got a few phone call interviews, but it didn't lead to any offers. So, getting all those rejections and applying to places and not hearing back, I felt so defeated because I just wasn't getting a new job offer. And I remember when I got back from work, like when I got off the metro and got into my car, before I would drive off, like before I would drive back home, I would always play a song. The song is Hold On by Wilson Phillips. And I would just sit in the car, listen to that song, and just remind myself that, things will get better. What I'm going through right now is just temporary, and better days are ahead. So I would listen to that song every day in the car and remind myself that before I drove home. And so months of this go by, and, every week, every month passes, I just feel more and more stressed out, drained, Like my mental health is just at an all-time low. It also doesn't really help that during this time period, it was from like November to February, which is also when like I tend to have seasonal depression. So, that kind of factors into it as well. And, I was just at an all-time low. And at this point in my life, I call this period my quarter life crisis, because I just feel like I entered like a new stage of life where like, I graduated college and I started this full-time job, and it was so hard for me to accept that this is my reality. This is what the real world is like. And it was just so hard for me to accept that like I basically have to, work this 9 to 5, but then I, combine that with the whole like, comparing myself to other people, me feeling like I haven't really accomplished much and that I'm a boring person, and me feeling directionless and feeling like, I don't know what to do with my life. So all of this was going through my mind, and, that's why I call it my quarter life crisis. And so, this is going through like November through February, and then the beginning of March, I told myself, you know what, after the month ends, so at the end of March, I'm just going to straight up quit my job. I literally told myself that. Even if I don't have a job lined up, I'm just so fed up, I'm just going to quit my job. And I was determined to do that. But, during this time as well, in March of 2020, by this point, we had already heard about, the coronavirus. I know when I first heard about it, I didn't think it was like that big of a deal. Obviously it was. But it was around mid-March, I think, like mid-March. That's when they, told us, COVID is rising. More people are getting affected. So because of that, we're going in a lockdown. So if you go into the office for your job, you can't go in anymore. You got to work from home. So when I heard about this, I was so happy because I got to work from home. I didn't have to go into the office. I got to wake up later in the day. I saved over 2 hours a day because I didn't have to commute. So because of that, I felt less tired. I had more energy. I felt happier. And it really felt like, and I know it's bad to say, but like it felt like a miracle happened because of this situation. I was like, man, like this pandemic like saved my mental health. And I know I mentioned earlier that like I was determined to quit my job, but like since I was working from home, I did not quit my job. I kept working, and it was more bearable because I was working from home and I didn't have to deal with, my manager, who I kind of hated at the time, and, certain coworkers that I just didn't really like. So I was really happy that I got to work from home. And what was also really nice is literally like a week before the lockdown happened, I bought my old roommate's PlayStation 4. So I hooked it up in like the basement of my parents' house, and I was playing Skyrim a lot. Skyrim is my favorite game of all time. And It was my second time playing it through, because the first time I played it was back in high school when it first came out in like 2011. So I spent a lot of free time playing Skyrim, and it was so much fun. And during this time period, like, a lot of us were just like hanging out at home, and I would spend this time, like, if I wasn't like playing Skyrim, I was like just like going on walks outside, riding my bike, and it felt nice. I also became more introspective during this time period. I always feel like I tend to think a lot about just like myself, life in general. And, during the lockdown, I became more, I think, two things. One, I became more appreciative of just my health and just being alive, right? Because, every day, like, my parents and I, we would watch the news and, just hearing about people getting sick, people dying. So, it's something that I took for granted, right? The fact that I can just wake up every morning, breathing, being alive, being healthy, I take that for granted. And being in quarantine made me realize that. And then the other thing that I kind of got out of, like, the other takeaway from being in quarantine is just realizing that, time is the most valuable thing on the planet. We always say we have all the time in the world. We can do this later in the future, but the scary thing is we don't really know how much time we have left in the world. So once I had that realization, I think that's when I started to really assess my life. And I was like, yeah, I should definitely, make some changes, like, there's some things I can't control, like, I'm going to have to work this 9-to-5 job, but like, if I have like more hobbies and like, trying to, seek out more friendships and, connect more with my friends and family, like, my life won't seem as miserable. And I realized, like, my life seemed so miserable is because all I really did was go to my job, which I hated. And because of that, I just felt like every aspect of my life sucked because of the job. So, that was like a big wake up call for me to like tell myself, like, if you just like do more things in life, if you have more fun, if you, do more things you love, life will be much better that way. So yeah, I mean, I understand that, this was a really tough time for many people. Many people got sick. Some people lost loved ones, and, people were struggling financially. And, I do feel bad for those people that were affected, but obviously, a lot of good things happened to me during this time, and it was kind of like a blessing in disguise. So another thing that I think kind of helped me during that quarantine period is literally a day before, you know, a day before they announced the lockdown, I had gone on a date with a girl, and, during the lockdown, we couldn't really see each other in person, but we still continued to like text each other and like go on FaceTime calls. So we were talking all throughout the quarantine. And then once things started to slowly open back up, we started to like see each other in person again. And then we briefly dated. And that was like the first person I ever like dated. So I think like talking to her during this period definitely helped my like morale. I'm still deciding if I want to make like a separate video about that whole situation. Still deciding. So I might just like record a video of me talking about it and then rewatch it and see if I want to post it onto YouTube. But yeah, so just wanted to talk about, my experience with the COVID lockdown. I was going through a quarter life crisis, and then being in the lockdown, it helped a lot with my mental health. I had a lot of realizations about myself, about life, and it was really much needed.